Welcome to this extraordinary video. Today, we are going to share the story of a man who never fought wars, but trained a warrior who conquered the world. A man who never wore a crown, but shaped kings, emperors, scientists, and thinkers for the next 2,000 years. A man who didn't build machines, but created the very way we think about thinking. This is a life-changing, emotional, and inspiring story of Aristotle, the philosopher who taught Alexander the Great, and the mind that built the foundation of logic, science, politics, ethics, biology, education, and leadership. If you're someone who feels like the world ignores your ideas, wants to learn English by listening to powerful, true stories, dreams of changing the world not with weapons, but with words and wisdom, then this story is for you. This is not just a biography. This is a journey through pain, passion, power, and purpose. From a curious little boy in northern Greece to the man whose thinking became the blueprint of modern civilization. And yes, this video is also great for your English. You will improve your listening, your vocabulary, your knowledge of history, and most importantly, you'll learn how one person with nothing but questions in his mind transformed the world forever. So sit back, focus, and listen with your heart, because now begins the story of the man who taught the world how to think. Part 1. The Curious Boy from Greece. How it all began. Let me take you back. Not 100 years, not 500, but more than 2,400 years ago. In a small ancient town called Sagira in northern Greece, a baby was born in the year 384 BC. His name was Aristotle. His father's name was Nicomachus, a physician, but not just any physician. He was the royal doctor to the king of Macedonia. That meant Aristotle grew up close to people of power, medicine, and knowledge. He watched how his father used observation, diagnosis, and reasoning to study the human body. This left a deep impression on young Aristotle. He didn't play with toys like most kids. He played with questions. He didn't care about games. He cared about how things worked. Even as a child, he would stare at animals, plants, clouds, asking, why does a bird fly? Why does the sun rise? What makes people happy? What is truth? These were not ordinary thoughts for a child. But Aristotle was not born ordinary. He was born to observe the world with intensity, and he would spend his entire life doing exactly that. But everything changed when he was still a boy. Tragedy struck early. When Aristotle was young, both his mother and father passed away. We don't know the exact reason, but we do know this. He became an orphan before he even understood what death truly meant. That wound of being left alone so early never disappeared. But instead of growing bitter, he became obsessed with understanding life. He didn't ask, why me? He asked, what is life? What is death? Why are we here? His relatives raised him, and eventually he was sent to Athens, the greatest city of learning in the ancient world. And that is where his real journey started. When he was just 17 years old, Aristotle stepped into a place that would change his destiny forever. Plato's Academy, the very first true university in history. And at the heart of this academy stood a man who was already a legend, Plato, the greatest philosopher of his time, and the direct student of Socrates. Imagine you are a 17-year-old orphan. You walk into a place filled with the most brilliant minds in the world, and your teacher is a man who studied under Socrates himself, the man who chose death rather than stop speaking the truth. For Aristotle, this was paradise. For the next 20 years, Aristotle remained at the academy. He was not just a student. He became the brightest student Plato had ever seen. But even though Aristotle admired Plato, he didn't agree with everything. Plato believed in perfect forms. The belief that the real world is only a shadow and the flawless version of everything exists in another invisible realm. But Aristotle didn't believe that. He believed in what we can touch, see, measure, and test. Plato said, there is a perfect version of a tree somewhere beyond. Aristotle said, no, this tree right here, let us study it. let us understand it. He began writing about everything: animals, politics, human behavior, the stars, happiness, the soul. He wasn't trying to win arguments. He was trying to understand everything that exists. He asked endless questions and wrote thousands of pages all by hand with no internet, no electricity, no tools except his brain and a scroll. He was becoming more than a student. He was becoming a force of knowledge. But then something unexpected took place. When Plato died, everyone thought Aristotle would lead the academy. But he didn't. Why? Because many believed he was too different. His thoughts were too scientific, too rebellious, too challenging to Plato's teaching. And so, even after 20 years of loyalty, dedication, and brilliance, Aristotle was not chosen. It shattered his heart. He had lost his second home. So once again, like when he lost his parents, Aristotle had to leave something he loved. But this time, he didn't collapse into despair. He began a journey that would take him across the world and eventually into the life of a boy who would become the greatest man in history. The academy door had closed behind him. He had given it 20 years of his life. He had studied harder than anyone, questioned everything, and offered his deepest loyalty. But in the end, it wasn't enough. When Plato died, the academy needed a new master, and they did not choose Aristotle. Why? Because he did not fit their mold. He did not blindly follow Plato's views. He thought differently. He asked new questions. He wanted more than imagined worlds. He wanted to touch the real one. And for that, he was silently pushed out. Now at the age of 37, Aristotle stood at a crossroads. He was homeless. No work, no city, no post. But his mind, it was burning with fire. Aristotle did not complain. He did not attack the academy or seek revenge. He simply turned toward the unknown. He believed, if the academy won't hear my voice, the world will. He left Athens behind and traveled from city to city, searching not for comfort, but for truth. He believed every place, every animal, every plant, every human carried a lesson, and he would gather them all. Aristotle's first destination was Assos, a coastal city in Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey. It was ruled by Hermias, a former student of Plato and a wise, forward-thinking ruler who welcomed philosophers like family. Hermias saw the brilliance in Aristotle. He offered him a home, support, and most importantly, freedom to teach and think. Aristotle began giving lessons under the open sky. He taught not just theory, but real-world thought, asking students to look, touch, measure, and wonder. It was here that something surprising happened. Aristotle, the great mind, fell in love. He met Pythias, Hermias' adopted daughter. She was bright, thoughtful, and full of questions, just like him. They married. They had a daughter, also named Pythias. Aristotle, the philosopher of reason, was now also a father and a husband, and it changed him. He began writing more about ethics, family, and the balance of love and logic. He asked himself, what is a good life? What makes a human life complete? His heart was full, and his mind was expanding. But happiness is rarely safe for long. While Aristotle was building his peaceful life in Assos, the real world was watching. The powerful Persian Empire saw Hermias as a threat, a Greek leader supporting Greek philosophers. Dangerous. They captured Hermias. They tortured him, and then they executed him. Aristotle was crushed. His friend, his mentor, his protector was gone. This was a turning point. Aristotle realized something bitter. Even wisdom cannot shield you from the cruelty of power. He wrote a hymn for Hermias, not only in grief, but in honor. He would carry Hermias' memory with him wherever he went next. Aristotle moved again, this time to Mytilene, a city on the island of Lesbos. He was older now, wiser, a little quieter. And here, surrounded by the sea, something new awakened within him. He became fascinated with life. not just human life, but all life. He studied fish, birds, insects, mammals, the way they moved, the way they mated, the way they gave birth, the way they died. He dissected animals, observed their behavior, sketched what he saw, filled endless notes. This was the birth of biology. Not just thought, but observation, comparison, classification. He uncovered patterns. That dolphins breathe air. That octopuses shift color. That chicks form inside eggs. That some fish lay thousands of eggs while others give live birth. No one before him had ever studied nature this closely. While others worshipped gods, Aristotle was honoring reality. He was building the first true system of scientific knowledge the world had ever known. Meanwhile, far away in Macedonia, a powerful king was thinking about Aristotle. His name was Philip II, and he had a son, wild, brilliant, and full of fire. That boy's name was Alexander. Philip wanted his son to learn wisdom before he learned war. So he remembered Aristotle, whose father had once served as royal physician, and who was now the greatest living mind in Greece. He sent an invitation. Come to Macedonia. Teach my son. I will give you everything you need. Aristotle agreed. Philip built a special school for Aristotle and Alexander in a quiet place called Mysa, surrounded by nature, trees, flowers, silence. It was not a palace. It was not a battlefield. It was a garden of thought. Here, Aristotle taught not only Alexander, but also a circle of young Macedonian nobles who would later rule the empire with him. He taught them logic, philosophy, politics, ethics, literature, history, geography, medicine, rhetoric, strategy. But most importantly, he taught them how to think. He gave Alexander a personal copy of the Iliad, the story of the Trojan War, with handwritten notes in the margins. That book became Alexander's Bible during his campaigns. Alexander was not easy. He was bold, ambitious, restless, but he respected Aristotle. Aristotle taught him that a true king must not only conquer, he must also understand. It became one of the most important mentorships in history. As Aristotle taught in Mysa, something extraordinary was happening in the background. His ideas were spreading. His notebooks were multiplying. His thoughts were expanding. He was no longer just a philosopher. He was becoming a force of nature, shaping the future with every word, every lesson, every scroll. And soon the boy he taught would become a man, and that man would ride out to conquer the world. When Alexander finished his education, he began his conquest. And Aristotle, he returned to Athens, older, wiser, and more renowned than ever. He was no longer the rejected student. He was now the teacher of the world's most powerful man. This time, Athens welcomed him. He founded his own school, the Lyceum, a place unlike Plato's academy. Here he walked with his students, spoke while moving, asked endless questions, and taught everything from logic to literature, science to soul, nature to nations. His students were called peripatetics, those who walk around. In this school, Aristotle did not just teach. He created a movement of the mind. He began writing endlessly. Politics, ethics, poetics, metaphysics, rhetoric, on the soul, history of animals, and hundreds more works. He was not chasing cleverness. He was trying to capture all human knowledge in a single lifetime. He believed everything connects. If we understand one thing deeply, we can begin to understand everything. He created systems, definitions, categories. He declared, logic is a tool for truth. Ethics is the path to happiness. Politics is the art of living together. Poetry is the mirror of emotion. Biology is the study of life itself. He believed in balance, in purpose, in observation, in discipline, in asking, what is this thing? What is its purpose? What makes it excellent? That was his way of studying everything. From frogs to stars to kings to plays to human pain. Where we stand now, Aristotle is back in Athens. He has a school. He has students. He has ideas. And he has influence across the world, thanks to Alexander's expanding empire. Part 2, Power, Politics, and the Price of Wisdom. The world was changing quickly. Aristotle, now in his 40s and 50s, had become the most respected thinker alive. He was teaching at the Lyceum in Athens, writing furiously and attracting students from across the Greek world. His philosophy was no longer just theory. It was shaping real power. Because somewhere far from Athens, his former student, Alexander of Macedonia, was sweeping across the world like a storm. By now, Alexander had already crushed the Persian Empire, taken Egypt, pushed into Asia, and become the ruler of the largest empire in history. And everywhere Alexander went, Greek ideas followed, especially Aristotle's. He sent plants, animals, maps, and cultural notes back to Aristotle in Athens. He built libraries. He encouraged education. He carried the Iliad annotated by Aristotle everywhere he went. Aristotle was not riding into battle, but his mind was riding beside Alexander, shaping the empire from the shadows. And the people of Athens knew it. That is why, for a while, they tolerated his presence. Even though he was not Athenian by birth, and even though he had once been rejected by the academy, now he had power, not through soldiers but through ideas. At the Lyceum, Aristotle was not only giving lectures, he was building a machine of knowledge. He created a structured system to study ethics, politics, biology, psychology, astronomy, economics, drama, logic, education, memory, emotion, dreams, philosophy of war, philosophy of friendship, philosophy of everything. He did not treat subjects as separate. He believed everything was interconnected. He trained his students to observe the real world, to measure, to analyze, to question everything. They gathered laws from hundreds of city-states to write the first encyclopedia of political science. They collected information about animals, diseases, cities, rituals, theater plays. Everything was examined, labeled, and debated. And while Plato's philosophy was poetic and mysterious, Aristotle's was sharp, logical, and built for reality. His writing was not elegant. In fact, it was dry and technical, but it was clear, honest, and structured like a blueprint of knowledge itself. And that is what made it endure for over 2,000 years. But not everyone celebrated. Aristotle's influence created enemies. Many Athenians never forgot he was not born in Athens. They never forgot that his student Alexander was a Macedonian conqueror. To them, Aristotle was not a Greek hero. He was a symbol of foreign power. They did not see a teacher. They saw a threat. And when Alexander began ruling harshly, executing rivals, and even declaring himself a god, Aristotle's name became dangerous. Whispers spread. Is Aristotle advising Alexander? Does he support tyranny? Is he loyal to Athens or the empire? None of this was true. Aristotle wanted no throne. He wanted truth. But public opinion is never logical, and the ground beneath Aristotle began to crack. Then came the news that changed everything. In 323 BC, Alexander the Great died suddenly in Babylon. He was only 32 years old. The cause remains a mystery. Some say fever, some say poison, some say fate. But one fact was certain. The empire he built in just 12 years collapsed overnight. Chaos spread. In Athens, people celebrated. To them, Alexander's death was the fall of a tyrant and a chance to reclaim freedom. But they did not only celebrate Alexander's fall. They turned on his ideas, his allies, his teacher. The same city that had condemned Socrates for corrupting the youth now turned against Aristotle, accusing him of impiety, of dishonoring the gods, of spreading dangerous thought. Was he guilty? No, But in Athens, truth did not save you. Powerful thinkers were feared. Philosophers were threats. The mob did not care for reason. History was repeating itself. Aristotle saw it clearly. He once wrote, "When democracy is ignorant, even wisdom becomes a crime." So instead of defending himself, he quietly left Athens. He is said to have told his friends, "I will not allow Athens to sin twice against philosophy. The first sin was killing Socrates. The second would have been killing me." And so he left. Aristotle returned to Chalcis, a city on the island of Euboea, where his mother had once lived. He was in his 60s now. He had no academy, no students, no public stage, only his writings, his notes, and his thoughts. His wife Pythias had long since passed. Now he lived with Herpyllis, a woman he loved, and their son Nicomachus, named after his father. He continued to write. Even in exile, he never stopped thinking. His mind, though his body weakened, worked like a living universe. He wrote of aging, of memory, of the soul, of how everything has a cause, a purpose, and a final form. He called it the unmoved mover, the cause behind all causes, the order behind all change, the perfect mind holding the universe together. It was his quiet version of God, not a man on a throne, but an eternal intelligence. He was now far from the city that once celebrated him and then betrayed him. He lived in quiet exile in Chalcis, an island city, with a heavy heart but an unbroken mind. His name was no longer echoed in the streets of Athens. No eager students wandered the shaded paths of the Lyceum. No couriers arrived from royal courts. No crowds, no noise, no applause. Yet inside his home, within his private world, something still burned. Because the world may forget you, but when you carry the universe inside your mind, you still have something to give. Each morning, Aristotle rose early. He no longer had servants rushing about or great halls filled with scrolls. But on his small wooden table lay piles of parchment, pens carved from reeds, and jars of dark ink. His hands trembled more than before. His body slowed. But his mind remained awake. He sat, dipped his pen, and began to write again. One sentence, then another and another, day after day, year after year. For now he had one final mission, to ensure that truth outlived him. In these last years, Aristotle no longer sought fame or legacy. He sought first principles, the deepest and most enduring questions. What is existence? What causes existence? What is the purpose of all that exists? Is there meaning behind the universe? What is the soul? What is man? Here he composed his hardest and most abstract work, metaphysics. In it, he wrestled with ideas no one had ever dared put into logical form before. The nature of being, the order of reality, the concept of an unmoved mover, something that sets all motion into being but itself remains unmoved. A divine intellect, pure thought, not a god of temples, but something higher, invisible, eternal. He was not seeking approval. He was not chasing popularity. He was not striving to impress kings or scholars. He was only trying to explain the unseen framework of the universe. And he did it alone. Yet in exile, Aristotle was not entirely alone. He lived with Herpyllis, the woman who had been with him since Athens, and their young son Nicomachus. This boy was the last bearer of Aristotle's blood, his possibility, his hope. Aristotle loved his son deeply. He spoke softly to him, told him stories, shared his thoughts, the way a philosopher speaks to a pupil, but with the warmth of a father speaking to his child. So when he began writing a new work on morality and the purpose of life, he called it Nicomachean Ethics, not because it was written for Nicomachus, not because it was about him, but because in that name Aristotle placed his heart, a father leaving not riches or monuments, but wisdom. In this book he explained what it means to live a good life, why pleasure is not the highest goal, why virtue matters, why true happiness comes through balance, character, and purpose. He wrote, "We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. It became one of the greatest works ever written about how to live, and it was born from a man watching his own life fade. The seasons turned. Winters stretched longer. Summers grew shorter. Aristotle's legs weakened. His sight dimmed. He still wrote, even when his fingers locked in pain. He still whispered questions to himself, still argued with ideas inside his own mind. But the man who once taught kings, who had named the stars with logic, who had classified the creatures of the earth, who built schools and gave philosophy its name, now walked slowly through his garden, or sat quietly, watching the wind move through the trees. And sometimes tears welled in his eyes, not from fear of death, but from knowing a deep and painful truth. Everything he had written could disappear. In those days, there were no printing presses, no digital archives, no computers, no cloud storage. Every single word lived only on fragile scrolls, made of thin, brittle material, easily destroyed by flame, water, or time. He had written hundreds of works, some say over 200, but he knew that if even one generation failed to copy them, they might vanish forever. This thought haunted him. He did not crave statues. He did not desire temples in his honor. He wanted only one thing: let the knowledge survive, even if I do not. When Aristotle felt the end approaching, he wrote his will. It was not dramatic. It was not sentimental. It was practical, measured, and clear. He requested that Herpyllis be treated with dignity and given a home, that Nicomachus, his son, be well educated and properly cared for, that his servants be freed and granted respect, that his body be buried beside Pythias, his first wife. No grand monuments, no lavish ceremonies, just a simple, clean end to a life built on reason. He had lived for truth, not for fame, and that is how he chose to leave. Aristotle died in 322 BC, only 1 year after Alexander. He was about 62 years old. Yet after his death, much of his work was lost. His students tried to preserve his writings, but the political chaos of the time scattered them. For nearly 2 centuries, his teachings lay hidden, locked away in dusty storage, forgotten by the world. It was not until the Roman age and later the Islamic Golden Age that fragments of his wisdom were rediscovered, translated, and revived. A few accidents less, and perhaps we would never even know his name. Some writings were secretly passed from teacher to student. But for most of the world, Aristotle was gone. Within decades, his name faded from public memory. People stopped quoting him. His lessons disappeared from schools. New thinkers rose with louder voices, different ideas, greater influence. Rome ascended, Greece declined, and piece by piece, the scrolls of Aristotle disappeared. The empire that had spread his knowledge was gone. The kings he had taught were dead. The school he built stood silent. The fire had gone out. For almost 200 years, it was as though Aristotle had never lived. In a small town inside a dusty cellar, a hidden collection of fragile scrolls sat in silence. Their ink was fading, their pages crumbling, their language too difficult for most to read. But they were there. One day, in the city of Skepsis in Asia Minor, a wealthy book collector named Apellicon heard rumors of these forgotten works. He traveled, he paid vast sums, and finally he saw them with his own eyes. The lost writings of Aristotle. Hundreds of scrolls, damaged, dirty, scattered, but still alive. He did not grasp every word, but he knew these were no ordinary writings. He carefully packed them and carried them back to Athens. And after nearly 2 centuries, Aristotle returned to his city. As Rome expanded, it absorbed Greece and its culture. Roman generals, scholars, and leaders admired Greek thought, yet most followed Stoicism or Epicureanism. not Aristotle. That changed when the Roman general Sulla plundered Athens and captured Pelicon's library. He took Aristotle's scrolls back to Rome. There, a brilliant scholar named Andronicus of Rhodes studied them. He didn't just read them. He organized them, edited them, classified them into categories: logic, ethics, politics, science, metaphysics. From chaos, he built a system. He compiled what we now call the Organon, Aristotle's logic. The Nicomachean ethics, his vision of how to live. The politics, how people should live together. The poetics, art and drama as reflections of truth. Metaphysics, the study of being and cause. The anima, the study of the soul. The history of animals, the beginning of biology. These were not just books. They were the skeleton of civilization, and they had almost vanished forever. Centuries later, in the Islamic Golden Age, something remarkable occurred. In cities like Baghdad, Cordoba, and Cairo, scholars gathered ancient texts, translated them, studied them, argued over them, and built new knowledge upon them. Aristotle's name rose again. Thinkers like Avicenna, Averroes, Al-Farabi, and Ibn Rushd all studied him. They called him the first teacher. His logic, ethics, medicine, and astronomy became cornerstones of Islamic learning. His works were taught in universities across the Muslim world. Through their translations, Aristotle re-entered Europe. By the 12th and 13th centuries, Europe was awakening from the Dark Ages. Christian scholars, especially in Paris, rediscovered Aristotle through Arabic translations later rendered into Latin. At first, the church distrusted him. He was not Christian. He never spoke of the Bible or God. But the theologian Thomas Aquinas saw deeper. He believed Aristotle's reasoning could support Christian theology. Faith could unite with logic. And through Aquinas, Aristotle became the foundation of European thought. For 600 years, European students studied Aristotle, his logic to argue, his ethics to live, his politics to understand society, his biology to explore nature, his metaphysics to approach God. When universities arose in Bologna, Paris, Oxford, and Cambridge, their curriculum rested on Aristotle. Even scientists like Galileo, Kepler, and Newton, who challenged his science, still followed his method: observation, logic, reason. Even modern computer science and artificial intelligence trace their roots back to his classifications and logic. His influence grew so vast, so embedded, that it became invisible. He was no longer just a philosopher. He was the foundation itself. Think of this. Aristotle lived before Jesus, before the Roman Empire, before paper, before Islam, before electricity, telescopes, democracy, skyscrapers, the internet, or AI. And yet, 2,300 years later, we are still reading his words, asking his questions, debating his ethics, and thinking with his tools. Aristotle never commanded armies. He never ruled a nation. He did not amass wealth. He died in exile, nearly erased. And yet he triumphed, not with weapons, not with power, not with riches, but with thought. He did not conquer cities. He conquered ignorance. He did not build an empire of land. He built an empire of reason. And today, whether we notice it or not, we live in a world Aristotle helped create. Part 4. The philosopher who became time. His final gift to the world. His name lives. His words live. His mind lives. His questions live. And through them we live better. But how? How did a man nearly forgotten become the intellectual father of the modern world? Let us answer by stepping once more into his legacy. Aristotle did not only teach students. He taught generations. His questions were so universal that every age has returned to them. What is truth? What is justice? What is happiness? What is the soul? Why are we here? And the reason we still read him today is simple. He never told people what to think. He taught them how to think. He didn't give you the answers. He gave you the tools to find them yourself. That is why his words feel alive, not ancient. So what did he teach? Let us distill his lessons. What is the meaning of life? He said, everything has a purpose. The purpose of a knife is to cut. The purpose of a seed is to grow into a tree. And the purpose of human life is to fulfill one's potential. This goal he called eudaimonia, not just happiness, but a full, meaningful life of balance, excellence, and honesty. What is real happiness? He said, not money, not pleasure. True happiness comes from virtue, courage, kindness, wisdom, fairness, discipline. You must practice good actions as you practice sport. Muscles grow by repetition. So does character. What is greatness? He said, not birth, not status. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence is not an act but a habit. If you lie daily, you become a liar. If you speak truth daily, you become honest. If you study daily, you become wise. Greatness is habit. What is the best way to live? He taught the golden mean, balance between extremes. Not cowardice, not recklessness, but courage. Not laziness, not obsession, but discipline. Not silence, not rudeness, but honesty. Balance is peace. What is the soul? He said, the soul is not a ghost inside you. It is your form, your choices, your actions. What makes you you? It is potential turned into life. If you live with virtue, your soul is strong. If you live with lies, your soul weakens. What is the role of government? He said, not total freedom, not total control. Politics is not about power, but about justice, fairness, and education, helping people become their best selves. What makes us human? Logic, language, memory, purpose. We're the only beings who ask, what is right, what is wrong, what is my role? And Aristotle never stopped asking. Why tell this story today? Because the world is noisy, addicted to speed, obsessed with attention, and quick to forget wisdom. In such a world, Aristotle is a lighthouse. He teaches, quiet thinking is strength. Truth takes time. Growth takes patience. Discipline is freedom. Greatness is an action, not birth. And even if the world forgets you, if your words are honest and your intent pure, you will live in the minds of future learners. This story is not just about a philosopher. It is about you. Because every sentence here helps you learn real English, practice deep thought, and feel the motivation of meaningful ideas. The best way to learn is through real stories with real meaning. If you understood this story, congratulations. You are already growing. 2,300 years ago, a boy asked, why does the world exist? What is my purpose? How can I live well? How can I help others? His name was Aristotle. He never imagined airplanes, skyscrapers, satellites, or smartphones. He lived in sandals, scrolls, silence, and exile. Yet he shaped how we all think. His body turned to dust, but his mind became timeless. This is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of a mindset. Ask questions. Think deeply. Practice virtue. Grow daily. Lie with reason, balance, and purpose. That is Aristotle's real legacy. Now it is your turn. Read. Learn. Question. Grow. Inspire. This video is not just for learning English. It is for learning how to think, how to grow, how to live, so that you are never forgotten. If this story touched you, if it taught you something new, if it moved your heart, then do one thing now. Subscribe. Because this is only the beginning. And the next story may change your life even more. Until then, keep learning, keep growing, and never stop thinking.